Thank you for tuning into today's video. This is Chris coming at you, and today we're going to talk about how to organize computer files. The reason I wanted to cover this topic is because I don't think very many people realize how many of their computer headaches and frustrations would go away if they simply took the time to organize the files that they're saving on their computer. There's about 5 points that I'm going to cover in today's tip, and it's really going to help you out a lot. So let's go ahead and cut right to the video. Well, the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about is the fact that basically a computer is just a big filing cabinet. It doesn't matter if you're using Windows on a PC or Mac OS or even Linux. Basically, every computer stores everything in files. So if we go to the C drive here, which is my hard drive, and you go to the Windows directory, these are all folders and files that Windows uses to operate. And so they've taken the time to make a logical structure of their files, and really they encourage people to do that too. And that's why they've set up things like the My Documents folder. The second point is that you want to start out building a file structure using buckets. And Microsoft and Windows XP has kind of started that process for you by making a My Music and a My Pictures. And so what you want to do when you're organizing your files into a logical file structure is you want to start out by thinking of the buckets that you're going to make and make a folder for it. And it's real easy to make a new folder. You just right click and go to new and then click on a new folder. Then just start making folders that match up to the buckets that you know that you're going to save your files into. For example, you could make an ebooks folder, and you could make a homework folder. And then you could even make an artwork folder. You just want to start out by making buckets that you know are going to work for you. And it's really important that you make a file structure that makes sense to you. And one thing that I see that happens a lot with people with their computers, especially at their house, is that they don't create different accounts for the different people that use the computer. They just log into the same account, and then what happens is you get these jumbled up file structures, and it gets really disorganized because then all of a sudden when you go to your My Documents folder, you don't necessarily understand what all the files and folders are for. And so I highly recommend that if you have a multi-user operating system like Windows XP, that you take advantage of that. That way each user on your computer can make their own file structure. That's really important. Another important point to remember is there isn't any right or wrong way to do this. For example, if you go to My Pictures, I've already created some subdirectories. One for pictures about Jennifer, Jim, and Christmas. And in each folder, I have a 2007 folder, so I can store pictures in that way, like in a filing cabinet. Well, you want to make your folder structure in a way that makes sense to you, like I said before. So what if all along the way that you've decided, this doesn't make very much sense at all, that you should really be filing by year, but that your buckets should be by 2007 and 2008, and then stored Jennifer, Christmas, and Jim into those. That's totally fine because it's your filing cabinet and it's really easy to change. Because really the most important part is that you're organizing your data and all of your files into a system that makes sense to you. That way your files are easy to find and it makes sense on what all of this information is, because after a few years the data can really add up and it can be really confusing if you don't take the time along the way to sort it out. Now I want to take some time to talk about areas that people get themselves in trouble. And by far the biggest area that really gets people really disorganized is when they're downloading information software programs or files off of the internet. And so let me go ahead and bring up a web browser and I'll show you exactly what I'm talking about. Now on the weekly computer tip toolbar, we have a useful links, and we have a section called software and downloads, and I'm going to go to Major Geeks Downloads. It's one of my favorite websites for software downloads. So here we have the download page for Trillion, which is a really cool messaging piece of software. And let's say I find this I find this program out on the internet, and I decide that I want to go ahead and download it. So I click here to download it, and in a second it's going to prompt me where I want to save it on the hard drive. Now what I've seen a lot of people do is they don't put any thought into where they're going to download this file. What happens with Internet Explorer, for example, is a lot of times it will just download it into a temporary directory, and that's almost like having it download into a black hole, because the temporary directories in Windows are really difficult to find. Or people just download it to their desktop, and so their desktop becomes cluttered with all these installation files and other files. And the other thing too is a lot of people will save the file with a default name. See, we have trillion-v3.1.exe, and that file name probably made a lot of sense to the programmer who developed this program, but does it make sense to you? Probably not. So a good thing to do when you're saving files like this is to just take a few seconds of thought about where you're going to save it, and because I know you want the instant gratification of just downloading the file, but it'll pay off to just take a few seconds and to organize things when you download. And so a good thing to do is in your My Documents directory is to create a directory called installation files or something of that nature. And then maybe even make a smaller bucket. I know that this is a instant messenger program, so I'll make another directory called messaging. And instead of just leaving it like here, I'm going to rename it to something that I'll be able to remember later. Now I'll save that file. And the last point that I wanted to cover with you is that it's important to stick with what you've set up. It's well and good to make all of these directories and then decide that this is going to be your game plan, but then a week or 2 weeks later into it to go back to old habits and just keep saving files into My Documents with all these crazy file names, and then you have to spend time opening these files just to remember what they were. So number one, it's important to create your logical file structure that makes sense to you, but number two, it's important to make a commitment that you're going to use that. All right, let's go ahead and summarize the main points of today's tip. Number one, your computer is a virtual filing cabinet. Number two, store your files in buckets. Number three, create a file structure that works for you. Number four, organize your files as you download. And number five, stick to what you set up. So I promise you these things are going to make you feel better about using your computer. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week.